So this little metal box device, and yes, it's metal, is a Ubiquiti EdgeRouter X. You can get these for about 50 bucks. And I wanted to try and just see how powerful a $50 router was. But it's a pretty neat little device. Now, it has not 4 ports, it has 4 logical ports, so you can create 4 logical networks. It supports VLAN, it supports QoS, it's got a really slick web interface that makes your standard router configuration easy. It has some load balancing failover options in it as well. You can power it through a PoE pass-through or through the included 12-volt adapter that it came with, reset button. But I figured I'd go a little step further in here and show you what's inside. So I already took the screws out. And this board's pretty well set up. The completely packed. You have a heat sink right on the CPU, memory chip. It's looks really well made. Like, there's nothing about this that feels cheap at all. On the inside, this is what connects the LEDs in the back. So you have this row of plastic to connect to the flashing lights that go here. And it's a pretty impressive box. I've left it running for quite a while, heavy routing of traffic, doing some load testing on it, and it barely gets warm. So they did a good job with heat dissipation with the heatsink on here and the metal box, so there's no real worries. It does have mounting, so you can wall mount it, and with it being so small, you know, it makes for a really clean installation. So you could, you know, bring in from the ISP, even 2 ISPs, and put it in here and come out and go into a switch, and away you go. It's got some neat features that we'll cover in a second, but like I said, it's an impressive little box for the very physically small footprint and being an all-metal design, and then only costing $49 for this model. Okay, when we first log in, you have to use the username UBNT and password UBNT in order to get in. Now, this is a default setup. By default, when it's set up, it does not route any traffic. ETH0 has a default IP address of 192.168.11, and this is a default password. And the first thing it's going to do when I log in is want to know if I want to run the wizard. Now, if you don't want to run the wizard, you're going to have to open up the command line and start configuring the interfaces. Run the wizard unless you want to jump right into that and you're familiar with how to configure firewalls right from the command line. So we're going to say yes. And we're going to choose our Ethernet port. I have the internet for in ETH4, as I showed here in these lights. You get link lights for each one. I want the 192.168.11. Go ahead and give me a DHCP server. For now, we're just going to keep existing users, but you can add your users or create a new admin user or change the password for the UBNT user. So it is set up DHCP. We don't have a VLAN, so I'm just, you know, if you were setting up, for example, with a cable modem, this would be like your default setup. Plug it in to your ISP, plug it in this case to ETH4, and away we go. So we're going to apply changes, and reboot. System reboots, it takes under 60 seconds to get booted up. It's reasonably fast. Okay, we're logged back in, it's rebooted, and like I said, it says uptime of a minute. That's from it's counting its boot. It's pretty fast. Like I said, it took under a minute by the time I can get right back into the web interface here. So here's the basics of it. You have which Ethernet ports are connected. You have a switch here. You have the Ethernet 4. These are other logical network ports that you can create. Now, you can bridge these into the switch itself, but that requires going back down to the command line and using the tools from the command line to bridge them back together. Now, it's pretty slick that you can do that, and I really like the advanced features, but we're going to stick with some of the basics here. We do have a traffic analysis system as well in here. It'll give you the total bytes for the traffic. By default, it's disabled, so we're going to go ahead and enable it so we can gather some traffic statistics. Now, here's your routing where you can see the route tables, firewall and NAT. Now, adding the different firewall and NAT, not a problem. You just pick the interfaces and you can add port forwarding between them. Add a LAN interface, E0, add a rule. You can actually add multiple ones here, which is kind of cool. And then you could choose the rule set. So we're just going to say like port 80, forward to address, one of the internal ones here. Test www. Apply. And now you have a rule for that. It's fairly straightforward for mapping it. So it's going to map from ETH4, ETH0, which is my LAN, and here's the begin port, the IP address internally, forward to port, and give the port a name. And deleting them, just as easy as you had the rules, just delete, yes. For any of the services, like we have a DHCP service, actions, you can view the leases, view the devices, pool size, leased, available, static mappings you can create in here, details if you want to force certain things over, change IP addresses. Like it uses itself for DNS, but I could force in a different DNS because it does DNS forwarding from the DNS it got from the ETH4. There is VPN support. I don't know, they have PPTP in here. I don't recommend using it because it's an older protocol by Microsoft. It's been long deprecated because there's some security flaws with it. It does have option to do IPsec site to site. I really wish it had an option for doing OpenVPN. That's my preference in like a pfSense box. The other options on the wizard, which is we ran the basic setup. There's a load balancing 2. And what these are is wizards to connections from different internet providers. It does have a switch option in here, so you can then tie together pieces for a switch on a static IP and configure the switching site. Now, if you want to reconfigure these, it's going to tell you it's going to reset to default configuration before doing it. So if it's too outside of what it and there's changes already been done, they reset and reconfigure. But for most part, basic setup, for most of your home networks, if this is you're going to use it at your home, perfectly fine to there. Maybe you want to set up 2 LANs when you're at home, and there's an option for that as well. And what that would allow you to do is, for example, if you want to keep certain guests on one side of a device and certain other people on the other side of the device, it's got that option here. Now let's talk about performance, because that was one of the things that really made me curious. How well does a $49 box perform? So let's do some testing. Okay, we've got on another network, I have iPerf set up, and I've got it servered on an address at 226. Now this is directly into a gigabit and on the another gigabit switch that's right on the other side of this EdgeMax router. So we're going to see what kind of performance we can get out of here. You can see the CPU load at the top jump to about 50% when I'm doing this. And 310 megs. So we'll try it again for some consistency. Now I've seen it do this where it bursts on the first test, but once you start getting consistent with it, it seems to route at about 170 to 180 megs. I'm not sure why the first time it runs more. It's done that inconsistently for me where I get like a burst of fast. But for most users, this would be perfectly fine because the fastest internet provider, generally in our area right now, can only provide at 100 megabit. So with them only being able to provide at 100, you're not going to outrun this. So this device being able to go all the way up to between 180 to 200 here, I don't see as an issue. But if you're going to have faster connection like you got a fiber connection that's at maybe 400, 500 megs, well, this isn't really the device for you. But if you're running that kind of connection speed, you probably want something a little bit more beefy. See, now it jumped back up and we're getting a little bit faster again. I think it's a matter of some of the logging keep up, so we can try turning off the traffic analysis. See if we disable this, say yes, we'll run the test again. So now we've turned off the traffic analysis. Let's see what happens. So with the traffic analysis turned off, it seems like I'm getting a more consistent speed out of this. And it's a little bit faster. So it looks like we can route closer to about 300 megs consistently with the traffic analysis turned off. Pretty neat though. Pretty impressed, like I said, for the device for being only $49 is able to handle all this. So let's take a look also. Now, when I said you have to command line into this, there's 2 ways to do it. They give you a command line tool to log into the device here, but it's kind of small and kind of hard to read. So I'm just going to go ahead and SSH into it. UBNT at 192.168.1. So this has a little MIPS processor in it, and it's running Linux 3.1 kernel here. you have most of your basic commands, but autocomplete is not enabled on this. So I'm looking at this, and you got the standard bash RC profile. We do have top, so we can watch the processor usage. They do have Vi on here, so if I wanted to edit a file, I can. I don't think they have nano. Nope, no nano. So Vi is your text editor on here, which is not a problem. Standard different etc configurations. You can set interfaces using switch serial, switch port, all the different command lines to set the interface settings on here directly, and then you can commit them. Kind of nice. Like I said, you got to kind of be a command line jockey to really get some of the more advanced configuration on here, or you just use a couple wizards on there. But for basic routing and for $49, this gets you going pretty quick. It's pretty hefty little machine. Made of metal, so that's nice. It doesn't feel cheap in plastic. It's really decent in performance for your basic routing. I'm still a fan of the PF Sense routers, which can handle very much higher speeds than that, but this one gets the job done. But if we want to go to QoS, and we're going to set up something really basic here, just a test policy, and we're just going to limit it to, well, let's say 2 megs up and down, and apply. So now we can see if I run the same test again with the limited at 2. Also, the CPU usage is a lot lower now that we've set a QoS limit on there. And it does, there we go, 2.3 and 1.86. It definitely brings down the amount of available bandwidth on that. So in a nutshell, this is the Edge Max EdgeRouter. I'm running the V19 firmware. Great little device. Definitely happy with it. Performs really well for $49. You can't beat the price. Firewall, NAT services. The fact that you can clear failover on a $49 device is really impressive. So if you just have a client that has some basic needs but needs that failover with 2 ISPs, this is a low-cost, easy-to-install solution and generally pretty easy to configure. Thanks.